Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share paranormal hospital horror stories. First story, Haunted Hospital, Warren, Pennsylvania. So I was working at this hospital called Warren General in Warren, Pennsylvania, about 90 minutes east of Erie, Pennsylvania. I work night shift. I'm a travel physician, so this was one of the hospitals I traveled to. One night my floor was slow, so I went down to the CCU to help the critical care doctor who was swamped. Well, that night, my patient rang her call bell 3 o'clock in the morning. She asked me, "What does she want?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "The nurse that keeps coming in here and standing there in that corner." And she points to the corner behind the door. So I was like, "Who?" "Ashley, the nurse I was working with," and I pointed to her. She was sitting at the nurse's station on the computer, and she says, "No, the other one." Well, there was no other one. It was just us two. Just FYI, the patient was a woman in her 50s and didn't have history of mental illness and was not taking any meds that would make her hallucinate. So I kind of laughed, and I was like, "It's just us." And she just stares at me. So I say, "Okay, if she does it again, just yell for me, and I'll come right in." Her room was 8 feet in front nurse station. So about a half hour goes by, and she yells, "See, there you go again." I got up, started walking. I hear the bathroom door shut. It had been cracked open just a little bit to give her dark room a little light. I walk in, and I say, "See, you're dreaming. There is no one else here." She says, "No, she went in the bathroom." So I open the door, lights still on, no one in there. Looking confused, I say, what does she look like?" Because I thought someone was messing around. It's too dark to tell. I can tell it's a woman, but she's so dark, I can't really make her face out. So when she says that, I get a little weirded out, but the night ends and I forget about it. 3 months go by. I get pulled back down to the same unit. I have the same room as before, this time a man in his early 60s and the patient. Nice guy, alert and oriented and very polite. Night is going good. It's about 3 a.m. and his call light goes off, which means he needs something. So I walk in and he says to me, "You're my nurse, right?" And I shake my head yes. And he says, "Well, why does that lady keep coming in here and standing in the corner? What is she doing?" Way out. I almost shit myself instantly. This was 3 months later, same room, same thing. I said to him, "Honestly, I think it's a ghost, sir." And he laughs and I say, "You're not the first one to say that." I started telling everyone about it. And then I find out that the entire second floor has a nurse that's seen every once in a while. I guess in 1990s, a nurse who worked up there committed suicide, shot herself in the second floor bathroom, stressed out. Second story, demonic presence in hospital. I would like to preface by stating that I'm a Roman Catholic who has experienced paranormal phenomena since I was 5. My late grandmother had experienced similar phenomena, and my mother and sisters also, but to a much lesser degree. As I get older, I notice the experiences are slightly more darker in nature. I know very little of demonology other than what has been referenced in the Bible. I try to stay away from anything referencing demons, the devil, etc., which is why this experience was so difficult and I was not prepared. In October 2018, I was admitted to hospital due to an electrolyte imbalance. I was in a room with 3 other female patients. On my second night, my arms were finally free of the 4, so I was able to move around and assist the other women, who weren't as mobile, in getting ready for bed. One of the women was much older and cranky. She seemed to take an instant dislike to me when I first moved to the room, but warmed up to me after I helped her. When the lights went out, I decided to lay on my stomach and say my silent prayers. To the casual observer, it would have looked like I was asleep. During this time, I could hear the woman I helped argue with herself about me. She stated I was nice, and then she replied to herself stating, "I am not what I seem," or something to that effect. And it went back and forth like that during my prayers. Shortly after, the room started getting really cold fast. I silently prayed to God to watch over her and to free her from any negative influences. It was then that I heard her say these words very loudly. I don't know the Lord's Prayer. My name. I freaked out, processing quickly what had just happened. The woman knew I was praying over her. There was no way she could have known that. In my mind, I knew instinctively that I was not up for the confrontation. I was weak and still recovering. I got up from my bed and with my back to her, I said something like, "There is no way I can stay here now," to which she answered, "Yes, go." I won and laughed hard. I was amazed that the other two women had slept through it. It was around 10 p.m. when this happened. The room was stiflingly cold at this point, and I ran to reception and asked to be discharged, but the charge nurse said I couldn't leave without my doctor discharging me. I begged again to be discharged, but was denied, and the nurses tried to calm me as they got a hold of my doctor, who said he would be in at 7 a.m. and I needed to stay put. I asked to be relocated to another room in the interim, but the only available room was directly next door. That was way too close for my liking, so they put me in the day room with a blanket and pillow. I used my phone to call my sister to get me out of the hospital. She works at another hospital and told me the car wasn't home and to catch an Uber to her place. The ward was locked down for the evening, so I couldn't leave anyway and stayed in the day room. The TV was on standby, but I could hear voices coming from it, even though the screen was blank. The voices talked about a shooting at the hospital I was in with thousands of fatalities. It then talked about my baby nephew being in a plane that was shot down. By then, I was truly hysterical as fear for my family took root, and everything I learned went out the window. Throughout this time, the voices from the TV continued, calling me slut, whore, etc. I couldn't stay any longer in the day room, and the nurses had me on a stretcher right in front of the main desk where the charge nurse could see me. It felt like a really bad dream, and I was hysterical and paranoid. I laid down on the stretcher, and that's when I noticed hanging overhead the ward number 66. I was also on the 6th floor of the hospital. I wondered if it was why there was so much activity there. Not long after, I started hearing other voices coming from different rooms of the ward, asking about me. They seemed to be communicating to each other and laughing. I started silently praying again with more conviction. A male patient in the ward nearest my stretcher started crying out for help, claiming I was hurting him. I prayed even harder, citing the Lord's Prayer. He asked the nurse for the name of the lady outside hurting him, and she gave him my first name. He started crying again, joined by another voice 2 doors down. I prayed to know who they were in Jesus' name, and all these voices talked at once, but the one name I could clearly make out was Beelzebub. I continued to pray throughout the night as they taunted, laughed, cackled, and cried. At this point, the light in the man's hospital room was turned on as a nurse was with him, trying to calm him down. I had been sitting up on my stretcher bed whilst praying and watched his silhouette as he tried to inch his way to the open doorway. It was then that I noticed the odd shadow he cast. It was so strange. It looked like a spiky-headed being with a dog. Spiky-headed in an almost cartoonish way like Bart Simpson. It continued until morning, and I was moved to a small private room awaiting the doctor. The voices were still there verbally attacking and threatening me, but my hysteria was long gone by that point, and I was just determined to leave. I ended up discharging myself before the doctor arrived, but had to return as I still had the 4 catheter in my arm. On my return, they had placed me in another ward. I refused to go back to Ward 66, and I was able to recover in peace, and eventually the demonic taunting stopped. I had a course of bad luck following that event. Basically, all of 2019 was a series of misfortunes and bad luck that still hasn't come right. I don't know what to do other than keep on keeping on. I went to a psychiatrist last December who said other than the trauma I would need their help with, I was in good mental health. Third story. Something followed me from a psychiatric hospital. So I caught a lot of shit for this story in another sub, thus I removed it. But this is a personal experience, and what you read into it, yeah, that's up to you. This is a long story, sorry. So, I've been back and forth on whether or not to tell this story. Mostly because it involves some aspects of my working life that I'm not at liberty to discuss, but also because it had severe personal implications for me. Anyway, I have decided to share it here, and I hope you understand why there are things I simply can't go into detail about. This all started in December 2020. As part of my education, I was scheduled for a 6-month internship at a psychiatric hospital. I had previous experience with working with this type of patients, so I was really excited about it. I switched around to 4 different wards in the hospital, so I treated a lot of different people with lots of different problems. I was curious about all the different aspects, so I never said no to a task, which meant I came across everything from murderers and pedophiles to suicidal teenagers with personality disorders. In my work life, I've had people spit at me, verbally and physically assault me, throw shit at me, and all that stuff. So I like to think I'm a pretty though guy. And besides that, I always carried a personal assault alarm. One press of a button and staff from every ward would be there in a matter of seconds. On one of the wards, I quickly noticed that there was a certain room which was monitored 24/7 by a guard. To be clear, this is a pretty normal procedure, either because the patient is physically abusive, suicidal, or restrained. But most patients get the watch pulled off them relatively quickly. I asked a colleague, and she told me it was a female patient, let's just call her, and who was extremely aggressive and psychotic beyond belief. At that point, and had been restrained to her bed for 3 months. I cannot believe what I was hearing. We have really strict procedures when it comes to restraining people with belts. By the way, they resoft belts made of fabric, not leather. So, restraining the patient really is the absolutely last resort we go to. I asked the chief psychiatrist what was up with this girl, and he just scuffed and said, if only I knew, but honestly she defies logic. He told me that at first they thought she was psychotic, but her symptoms only got worse, no matter how much different medication they tried. Then they thought she might have suffered a trauma and was in a dissociative state, but that still didn't fit the profile of her symptoms. She had gone from being a perfectly normal woman in her 20s to being violent, extremely aggressive, and unable to speak in just 4 months. That is practically unheard of, especially as no drugs was involved. We regularly make a toxicology check of all patients and always when they're admitted. One day my alarm went off. They're all connected, so I know where I need to run to help my colleagues. I immediately knew it had to be Anne, and I was right. She had only had her legs and torso fixated. Again, normal procedure, if the patient otherwise is relatively calm. She had defecated in her hand and thrown it at the guard watching her. She then proceeded to bite her fingers so hard that 3 or 4, I can't remember the exact number, had really bad fractures. Both her hands were a bloody mess, and she needed like 50 stitches afterwards. I wasn't the blood or the fact that she would throw her own filth at us. I'd seen that loads of times. But the screams this woman made, it was the most primal, guttural, and terrifying sounds I have ever heard. It scared me shitless. The best way I can describe it's something like a bear growling and a mountain lion hissing and spitting at the same time. I have seen my fair share of people in primal distress, but I could have never imagined that a person could make sounds like that. As an intern, I am in no way allowed to use force. So I was just watching as 7 of my colleagues try to fixate her fully to her bed. They had serious trouble pinning her down. Remind you, these are really experienced people. At last, we called a medicinal alarm, which immediately calls for a chief psychiatrist to make decisions. He decided to forcefully medicate her. They gave her one and then a second shot. It only seemed to piss her off, even though it should have put a bear to sleep. At the 3rd injection, she calmed enough so that they could restrain her. She never nodded off. She just breathed heavily and kept staring up at the same corner of the room, sometimes smirking at something only she could see. Fast forward 2 weeks. I was back at the ward. It was a relatively calm weekend, so there really wasn't much to do, and it wasn't one of her good periods, so she had had her restraints removed. A guard was always by her, though. I was sitting in the office when suddenly I see and walking in the hallway without the guard. I don't know if he had taken a bathroom break or whatever, but he wasn't around. So I catched up with her. I asked her what she was doing in the hallway alone. But of course she didn't respond. I should mention that many of my colleagues were afraid of and rightfully so. even though everyone is aware that it's the illness and not the person attacking you. But when it keeps happening, that patient does catch some stigma. I, for one, always try to look at the person and not the illness. So I asked where we were going. She took me by the arm and led me to the common area. She went over to a book cabinet, turned and looked at me, and muttered, "Read." "Book?" I was completely taken aback by the fact that she was speaking. She pulled out a random book and handed it to me. She then sat down on the floor and started rocking back and forth. I joined her on the floor and started reading the book. It was just some random old book, probably from a charity, and it had no special meaning. But as I read, she came closer and closer to me. She then cuddled up to me, put her head on my lap, and fell asleep. One of my colleagues came by, and she looked absolutely shocked. And before I knew it, 5 or 6 people, including the chief psychiatrist, was looking at me, reading this random book out to her. I caught a lot of praise for this, which is always nice. But then, things took a turn for the worse, for me at least. It started one night when I was home alone. It was a completely normal night for me, until I heard something from upstairs coming down the stairs. The best way to describe it is like a big dog thrashing and tumbling down the stairs. You know, like when a dog rushes down the stairs to greet you. But this was bigger, much bigger. I could hear the weight of something tumbling down, while nails or claws or whatever slid on the steps. I got up, thinking that somehow there was a massive animal in my house. But there was nothing there. That scared the ever-living shit out of me. I had never had anything like that happen to me. I left the house and stayed the night with my parents. But I also had strange effects on my body, like I had a filter over my eyes or something. Everything started to seem out of focus, like tunnel vision, but with a massive blur added to it. And then I started to dissociate. I had this feeling of being totally out of contact with my body. Then came the panic attacks. My GF called an ambulance one of the times because I was on the verge of a heart attack. The paramedics said I had a heart rate of 240 BPM. I have had no prior problems with my psyche, but I figured it was stress. I have suffered from sleep paralysis before, but never with hallucinations or whatever you want to call it. But that started recently. I see a large black mass with long arms and legs sit in the top corner of our bedroom, like a massive spider, but just with 4 legs. This is now happening on a nightly basis. A couple of days ago, I told my girlfriend about it because she kept pestering me with questions about my nightmares. She said, "That's funny. Every time you're just about to go to sleep, you look up in that corner and you sort of smirk." That reminded me of Anne. And now I'm absolutely terrified that I might have brought something home. Believe or not, that's up to you. I have never treated a patient like Anne, and none of my colleagues had either. It was scary stuff. And I have never suffered any psychological problems before. Never. But something is going on, I'm sure of it. It feels like it wants to get back at me, or something ick. And by the way, Anne is much better today. She is in a rehabilitating home where she thrives. One day, she might even be able to have her normal life back. 4th story. Broke into an abandoned hospital at 14 and saw something I shouldn't have saw. I was dumb as a kid. I did a lot of ridiculous shit. But this encounter, just let me tell you, I learned my lesson about breaking into places that really should be left alone. It was in the middle of the summer. Me and my friend sat on a wooden fence smoking cigarettes, thinking about what the hell to do with ourselves. One of my friends suggested an abandoned hospital up the road from my house. We were unsure at first, as we'd heard a lot of stories from people who had previously went years ago before it was boarded up again. After much discussion, we went. It was boarded up with wood nailed to the windows. The doors were sealed shut, so there was no way we could have gotten in that way. We were going to walk away and just go home, but luckily I remembered I had something at home that I could get the boards off with. As we climbed through the window, we finally got in. It was like going through a time warp. The place wasn't heavily damaged, and the interior looked like it was from the 70s/60s. There was still stale, bloody towels there, too. It was eerie as hell. Anyways, we fooled around and freaked each other out for a few hours until we had to go. Before we left, we messed around with a fire extinguisher that had been left there while everyone was in the center of the hospital. I stepped out for a breather in the hallway with the window we entered through. I was at the bottom of the hallway, and I saw a pale, slender figure in a blue hospital gown climb out the window while looking at me. He looked tired and sick. I froze and screamed. I left as soon as it appeared. I will never forget how freaky it was. Fifth story. A trend I've noticed amongst the dying in the hospital. I will start off by saying that I work as a nurse in a major hospital in my city. I have worked on several units, but I currently work on a unit that is designated for those who are palliative, meaning those that require end-of-life care. That being said, I have seen a lot of people who are in the final moments of their lives. When people come to the end of their life, there is generally a sequence of events that occurs. It begins as their functionality declines, sometimes slowly, sometimes more rapidly. People lose their ability to walk, care for themselves, and eventually lose their ability to eat, talk, or control their body functions. Towards the very end, they slip into a comatose state which can last hours to weeks, and then eventually their heart stops. Just before the comatose state, people often develop a delirium in which they can become confused, energetic, and sometimes hallucinate. In my experience, I've noticed a trend in people who are experiencing these end-of-life hallucinations. Commonly, my patients report seeing dead relatives. I am somewhat on the fence regarding the supernatural, and I don't necessarily believe in an afterlife. However, a non-negligible amount of people tell me that they see their deceased loved ones. Husbands see their dead wives. Children see their dead parents. Sometimes they speak, sometimes they don't. Nobody has reported to me that this hallucination bothers them or makes them uncomfortable. In fact, most often people are comforted by these visits. My own grandmother experienced a heart attack several years ago and told me that she saw her deceased sister at the end of her bed. My grandmother survived, but it was uncertain for a long time whether she would. She is adamant to this day that her sister, who died when they were children, was there to guide her to the other side. I try to be open-minded to the spirituality of others, so these reports are quite puzzling to me. I favor science in my own opinions, and I personally believe there may be a psychological explanation. For example, these people are aware that they are dying and they are associating their own deaths with those that they have witnessed. I remember discussing this trend with another nurse, and she believed that they were angels. The second trend I have noticed is that people often see a dog in their room. Patients describe the dog in an alarmingly similar way. It is a black German shepherd with pointed ears that appears calm but attentive, watching them. Although the behavior of the dog sometimes changes, as some people say the dog is at the foot of the bed and some say the dog stands beside me in their room, the most unsettling aspect of this hallucination is that the patients are often unnerved or even terrified of the dog. I have had patients beg me to take the dog out of their room because it scares them. Some even move to tears. I try my best to comfort them, but often those patients will only be consoled while I am there and will become frightened again when they are alone. This is another hallucination that other nurses have mentioned, as they too have experienced this with patients. I'm pretty certain that this is just a trick of human psychology as well, but I always found it a little creepy. Sixth story. I work as a night guard for a run-down hospital. I think the staff is doing something to the patients. I've been working as a night guard in my local hospital for nearly a year now, and let me tell you, the darkness that settles over this place isn't just from the absence of sunlight. The job fell into my lap unexpectedly, a desperate attempt to escape unemployment after losing my previous job due to a company-wide downsizing. Supposedly, the old CEO had been caught embezzling funds, and the new one decided half the departments needed to be axed to cut our losses, whatever the hell that meant. When I first applied, the HR manager didn't seem too concerned about my lack of experience and security. They just wanted someone reliable to keep an eye on things while the regular staff took their much-needed rest. The place was pretty creepy, sure, but I didn't have many other options at the time. It was either use what I had already learned from a small security job I did for a month as a favor to a friend of mine at the time, or flip burgers. Everyone that paid, well, had their own private security company, and they certainly weren't going to hire some loser who barely had more than a month's experience under his belt. The first time I set foot inside my local hospital for my initial walkthrough with the head doctor, Dr. Roberts, a shiver ran down my spine. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting unsettling shadows in the dimly lit hallways. Dr. Roberts seemed unbothered by the atmosphere as he led me through each section of the hospital, explaining what each room was and its function, even stopping into a few long-term patients' rooms and introducing me to a few. Most of them were older people, but there was one kid who had broken his legs in a ski accident and had to stay in the hospital for a while to heal. His name was Alex, and he liked to stay up late. As we continued our tour, I couldn't help but notice the outdated equipment and faded decor. Roberts assured me that despite the hospital's appearance, they were committed to providing the best care to their patients. But his words seemed hollow against the backdrop of peeling paint and worn-out furnishings from the 90s. I scratched my head and asked him pretty bluntly if the camera system I was going to be using was old or recently made this century. He just smiled and kept leading me onto the hospital elevator and into the highest floor of the building before showing me a blue door. "This is the security office, Mr. Matthew. I trust everything is to your liking." The room was rather nice, actually. There was a small mini fridge in the corner of the room near the computers, plugged into a wall socket. It was stacked with energy drinks on the house from what Roberts had said. But he mentioned I would need to buy them myself once I ran out of them. But there was a vending machine in the lobby, so I wouldn't need to go too far to stock up again. Here's the weird part. While the building seemed ancient and looked ready to collapse at any given moment, the camera system was all shiny and new. It had completely HD quality during the daytime, and at night, it had a night vision mode that could allow me to see 20 feet down the hall and up to the door. Robert showed me the system in more detail, like he purchased the thing specifically for me to use. The weird thing was I remember using this type of system at my friend's job. Anyway, a few details stuck out about the thing. Dr. Roberts explained that the cameras automatically recorded footage of every floor every 5 minutes, and the data was backed up regularly. He mentioned that this setup was designed to keep the hospital secure and monitor any potential issues from patients or uninvited guests, as he put it. I remember thinking it was a bit excessive. It's not like this place would even be worth robbing. But who was I to question the guy's methods? He was nearly a foot taller than me and looked like he could fold me with how hard he gripped my hand for a handshake earlier in the morning. I didn't exactly want to get on his bad side already, just because of a weird hunch I had at the time. One detail that caught my attention was the need for constant data management. With all the recording, the system storage could fill up quickly. To prevent this, the footage had to be deleted daily to avoid the drive reaching capacity within 5 days. He made extra sure that I deleted the data and showed me 3 times how to delete it. Now, here's where things took a weird turn and probably an indicator I should have gotten the hell out of there in the first place. Dr. Roberts showed me a map of the hospital on a separate monitor, indicating where each camera was placed and in what rooms on what floors. Strangely, he specifically pointed out that my assigned floor, the highest one in the building, didn't have any cameras installed. When I questioned this, he brushed it off with a calm smile, explaining that there were no patients on that floor, so it wasn't a priority. But something about that explanation didn't sit right with me. Why would they leave an entire floor without any surveillance, especially when I would be spending most of my time there? It's not like they evidently couldn't afford it already with that room, probably being the most expensive thing in the hospital. As our tour concluded, we stepped out, and he thanked me profusely for taking the position again. Dr. Roberts assured me that the hospital was a place of healing and care, despite its outward appearance. He emphasized the importance of my role as a night guard, ensuring the safety and security of both the staff and patients during the night hours. I looked over at a rotting piece of drywall and shook his hand, staring off to the side as he said, "Healing." This place looked anything but healthy to stay. The first few nights weren't bad. Mostly I spent it talking to the cute nurses by the nurses' station. This one red-haired girl named Cassandra often liked to joke that they were the ones protecting me instead of the other way around, which I had to nervously laugh off a few times. What struck me as odd was how the nurses stared at me, not just in passing, but with an intensity that was hard to ignore. Those charming smiles would falter as soon as I looked away for a moment, and their eyes would lock onto mine, unblinking. The interactions were odd, to say the least, but I chalked it up to their quirky personalities or perhaps their way of alleviating the tension of the night. My brother used to stare at me a lot when he was younger if he didn't know how to end a conversation, so I figured it might have been something like that. And then there were the nights I spent monitoring the camera feeds. The nurses' strange behavior continued even in the surveillance footage. I noticed them lingering around the cameras pointed at the nurses' station, exchanging glances towards my camera multiple times, always with that same smile. After 3 weeks of uneventful working there, though, something happened. It was a Tuesday in September. I think I had gotten used to how creepy the staff was at that point, and they seemed to mind less that I was there at night. Mostly they just looked bored dealing with the elderly patients. I would too if my entire night consisted of being on my phone, twiddling my thumbs, waiting for something to happen. I even got bored because that's what I did for several nights in a row. There's only so much you can discuss with a 25-year-old nurse who's way out of your league and thinks you're cute before the conversations turn stale. I was scrolling through my phone until I happened to switch to the main entrance camera. I hadn't checked it much that night because it usually gives me a motion alert if the camera detected movement at all. Mostly, I'd have just been dealing with the neighborhood drunks at that point by either telling them to go away or calling the cops to get them from shuffling around the hospital. This time, this guy was certainly not drunk. There was a person laying on the floor of the hospital lobby who I hadn't seen at that point. He looked like he was covered in something. I assumed now it was blood. At first, I couldn't tell what I was looking at until he started to occasionally twitch around. I jumped up and raced down the elevator to the nurse's station, asking one of them to come with me, because there was someone injured on the first floor. I think they thought I was joking at first with how they just stared at me, but eventually one of them came and absent-mindedly looked over at the guy. He looked like he was stabbed about 20 times and somehow wandered into the building before collapsing. The nurse at the front desk was on her break, so I guess she never saw him just laying there. Something to point out is this area doesn't get that many visits aside from people like Alex who injured themselves too badly to stay at home, or the elderly who can't take care of themselves. We lived in a small rural area, so not much was going on at any given point besides some idiot burning himself alive while playing with gasoline. Back to the guy, he wasn't responding to the nurse lightly shaking him or talking to him in a monotonous way. We got another nurse over, and it was a big deal. They carried him off while I sort of just sat there and watched them do it, then went to head back to my security room a few minutes later after explaining what had happened to a nurse I liked. Her name's Cassandra. As I was heading back from the lobby, my mind wandering to possibly ask one of the nurses I've been talking to out, I heard a voice coming from one of the rooms. "Hey, Matthew, how's your night going? What's it like being a security guard in a place like this?" Alex's voice carried a tone of genuine curiosity, a small grin forming as he spoke. I sighed inwardly, slightly amused by his ability to strike up conversations in even the most dead of hours. "Oh, just another night of keeping an eye on things. Nothing too exciting," I replied, my steps slowing as I stood by his doorway. I didn't really feel like telling the poor kid that I probably just watched a dead man get put into a room and probably ruin his night. Alex leaned back against his soft pillows, his grin not wavering. "Well, at least you've got some company, right?" "Yeah, I suppose so," I replied with a chuckle. "But hey, how are you holding up, Alex? You seem to be up quite often." His grin faded slightly, replaced by a more contemplative expression. "Yeah, well, skiing accidents aren't fun, and they're a bit painful having your legs broken in about everywhere. But, the nurses here are pretty cute. Makes the visits a little less painful." He winked back at me. I laughed, shaking my head as typical teenage boy humor. "You're not wrong there. They're pretty nice." Alex's expression turned more serious, and his gaze seemed to drift off for a moment. You know, though, sometimes I wish they'd stop giving me the forgetting drugs. His words caught me off guard, and I raised an eyebrow. Forgetting drugs? What do you mean? Alex's eyes refocused on me, his tone oddly earnest. Yeah, you know, the stuff they give me to forget the pain. It's like every time I'm awake at night, they just pump me full of meds, and I wake up later with no memory of what happened. Now that I thought about it, it was sort of weird how Alex's door didn't have any cameras facing it where the hall his room is at. But I'm sure it's nothing. They're probably just a side effect of the medicine. Alex said while staring out his window. I scratched my head, my unease growing as I struggled to come up with a response. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Medicine can have all sorts of strange effects. Alex nodded, his gaze once again distant. Yeah, anyway, I'm probably going to try to get some rest now. It's been a long day. I nodded in return, not sure what else to say. All right, Alex. Take care and get some rest. Thanks, Matthew. Good night, he replied, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and resignation as I turned the light off in his room. Good night, kiddo, I said, watching him for a moment before turning and making my way back down the hallway towards the elevator. As I walked, I couldn't help but shake my head in disbelief. Forgetting drugs? What kind of hospital was this? I slumped into my comfortable chair and sighed. This was going to be one painful job, wasn't it? A few months later, a few days ago in fact, I had nearly forgotten about the whole thing until I was back at the hospital for another shift. Everything had been relatively uneventful, and I was getting paid extremely well for my work, so I kept showing up. After hours, I even asked Cassandra on a date, and she actually said yes. We've been seeing each other for a few days on and off mostly, and her house is gorgeous. But that night, I noticed that Alex's room had been unusually quiet. Usually, he was one to strike up conversations or make light-hearted jokes as I was walking past his room with my flashlight, but tonight, there was an eerie silence. Curiosity getting the better of me, I decided to check in on him. Making my way down the hallway, I approached his room and knocked gently on the door. There was no response, just a heavy stillness that hung in the air. My hand hesitated on the doorknob, and a knot formed in my stomach. Maybe he was sleeping. Alex, I called out softly, my voice carrying a hint of worry. Still, there was no answer. With a sense of unease, I slowly pushed the door open, my heart pounding in my chest. What I saw on the other side was a sight that made my blood run cold. The room was in disarray, the bed sheets tossed aside, and the window curtains swaying slightly as if disturbed by a breeze. But the most unsettling part was the empty hospital bed, the sheets drenched in a dark, crimson stain. I raced up back into my office and immediately checked the elevator camera, wondering if someone had broken in and attacked Alex. There had to be footage of someone walking in the elevator and heading to his floor. But there wasn't. For the past few hours, there wasn't any sort of weird activity or anything like that. Just silence. Desperate for answers, I rushed down to the nurse's station. Cassandra was there, her expression a mix of surprise and concern as I approached her. Cassandra, I need to call the police. Alex is missing. She glanced at me, her eyes widening for a moment before she held up a hand to stop me. Matthew, wait. There's no need to call the police. Alex got transferred to another room in the middle of the night. My confusion deepened. Transferred? Why? What happened? Cassandra sighed softly, her gaze unsympathetic as she filed her nails. Something happened with his legs, I think. It was a medical decision. The doctors felt it was best to move him to another hospital for specialized care. I couldn't shake the unease that was gnawing at me. But why was there blood in the room? And why didn't anyone tell me? Cassandra's gaze turned icy, and she stared at me for a long moment, as if thinking long and hard about something. Finally, she leaned in closer over the table towards me, her voice dropping to a low, almost chilling tone. Matthew, sweetie, I'm going to be nice to you here. The only thing in your resume was to watch the cameras and report anything suspicious, right? I nodded, feeling a sense of trepidation as her demeanor shifted. Good. So you shouldn't need to concern your pretty little head with anything that happens medically. Okay? Now, if you want to keep your job and stay out of trouble, I suggest you focus on your duties and leave the rest to us, she said, her voice dripping with a hint of condescension as she turned away from me. Now, good night, Matthew. Go back to your cameras. I stood there for a moment, watching as Cassandra returned to her paperwork, her demeanor shifting back to normal, as if our conversation had never happened. With a reluctant nod, I muttered a quiet good night before turning away and walking back to my security office. That was 3 nights ago. It's been my day off for the weekend, and Cassandra hasn't told me anything about Alex. It's not like it's her job to, I guess. We've mostly been on a few dates, and they've gone well. I've tried to push my thoughts on that hospital to the back of my mind, focusing on getting to know Cassandra better and try to enjoy some semblance of a normal life outside of this place. If anyone out there is reading this, I'd appreciate your thoughts or feedback. Am I overthinking things? Am I going crazy thinking something is messed up with this place? I'll be checking back here for any responses, so feel free to share your thoughts. 7th story. Don't go exploring abandoned hospitals. I haven't had a good night of sleep in 5 years. I can't even forgive myself sometimes for what I did. My name is Danny, and I have a terrifying experience to get off my chest. I always wanted to fit in with my friend group, but no matter what I do, I was always the odd one out. But one thing I had in common with everyone was I am a horror fanatic. That's what got me into the group at least. See, if I wasn't a big horror fan, I wouldn't be in the group. I didn't have any siblings growing up. I was mainly alone during my childhood, while my mother worked long-hour shifts. My love for horror came at a very young age for me. When I was scavenging my mother's closet for something to play with, I stumbled across an old dust-covered box. It was full to the brim of old horror movies. I was hooked seeing all the gore and killing the horror movies portrayed. It made me feel better about my lack of human communication and social status. My friend group consisted of 4, Zara, Hayden, Tammy, and myself. I was the black sheep of the friend group, mainly because I rarely talked to any of them. One day, we sat in the far side of the cafeteria near the corner. Sharing cringe horror was our specialty, especially Tammy. Tammy was the bold one out of our small friend circle. She always wanted paranormal games like Bloody Mary, the elevator game, and so on and so on. Hayden was the typical prankster and all-around jerk. One time he pranked a kid by inviting her to a fake birthday party. When she eventually found out the party invitation was fake, she tried to stab him, but that's another story for another time. There isn't too much to say about Zara. She barely talks to anyone. She lets her long, shaggy brown hair cover her face and ghostly pale skin. She's a genuinely an okay person. Rumors floated around the school of an abandoned mental hospital recently caught fire last night. I wasn't keen on exploring places, especially abandoned hospitals, but I couldn't say I was scared Tammy would never let me live it down. Tammy was the first one to address the rumors. She slammed her fist against the table, looking up at us with a big grin on her face. As she pushed her glasses up on her freckled, full face, she spoke in an interested tone. Guys, have you heard the rumors? Hayden sat his Spritekin down and wiped his mouth with his wrist. What rumors, Tam? He asked, raising a brow to her question. Her grin grew bigger and reached in her pocket for her phone. She shoved her phone into Hayden's face, and he grabbed her phone to read what was on the screen. I leaned over some to catch a glimpse of what he was reading. His big, brawny shoulders nearly blocked the view of the phone. He handed Tammy her phone back and rubbed his face. She looked at us with an excited look and shook in her seat while trying not to fall out the chair. After school, we're going to that abandoned hospital, she said with authority as she looked at our reactions. I gave her a weirded out look and started shaking my head no. Wait, let me get this straight. You want us to go to an abandoned hospital for what exactly? I asked while I turned my body to face hers. For my YouTube channel, duh. What's with all the questions, Dan? Are you in or out? She asked with a grin on her face. Hayden and Zara turned to face me and waited for my response. I slowly turned my head back towards Tammy and slowly nodded my head. Yes, do you know how many views we're going to get from this video? She yelled at me while shaking my body around. She leaped up from her chair and grabbed her things. She left a list of everything we would need. I left everything to Zara and Hayden as I left the cafeteria. I walked out the school building and walked over toward the bike rack. I unhooked my bike and started biking back home. As I pedaled home, the abandoned hospital couldn't leave my mind. All I could think about all the germs and diseases in that disgusting place. Looking back at it now, I should have backed out and pretended to be sick. But knowing Hayden and Tammy, they wouldn't let me live it down. As I got to my drive-thru, I got off my bike and walked up to the side of my house and parked my bike on the side of the house. I walked up to my front door and flipped over the welcome mat and grabbed the small bronze-colored key. As I opened the door, the cold air blasted my face, and I walked in. I sat my bag on the ground and walked to the refrigerator. A pink sticky note was left on the refrigerator door. Working late again, won't be back until 2:30. Love, Mom. I sighed in relief as I was alone home. I walked over toward my computer and signed it and went straight to Google. I searched up the abandoned hospital and read the articles about it. At least over 30 people died there. Horrible experiments were ran on the patients. No proper health care, harsh living conditions, abuse, the list goes on. When the public got wind of what the hospital, they wanted everyone involved dead. The owner, William D. Harris, was put on trial. He bought out the judge, and he was hit with a slap on the wrist. Soon after trial, William was found with his body torn to shreds in his own hospital. Ever since the day of his death, the hospital was abandoned and out of use. I turned the computer off and checked my phone. 6:35. My phone screen read back to me. Shit, I'd better start heading my way over there, I said to myself. While digging through the kitchen drawer, I grabbed the flashlight. Before leaving, I walked toward the cabinet and grabbed a pack of fruit snacks before heading out. As I stepped out the house and shutting the door behind me, I grabbed my bike and pedaled toward the back roads. While pedaling toward the location of the abandoned hospital, I checked around me, nothing but big tall trees and forest. As the sky grew dark, the air became thick and dense. The air was heavy, like bricks were placed onto my chest. As I got toward the entrance to the hospital, everyone was already set and ready. Finally, for a second there we thought you backed out, Tammy cackled as she set up her camcorder. I sat my bike down against a tree and walked over toward Hayden as he dug into his blue bag. "What you looking for?" I asked, glancing at his bag. Hayden grabbed and pulled out a handgun out of his bag. I wasn't a gun person, so I didn't know. He cocked it back and shoved it into his waistband and looked up at me. "D-dude, what the hell?" I replied while taking a step back. "Just gotta have it just in case, don't know what sicko could be in there, you know. There's probably no need for it, dude, Jesus. Just don't have it pointed at someone, please," I said with worry in my voice. I slowly backed up from Hayden and slowly walked myself toward Tammy. "Hey, Tam Dash." I was interrupted by Tammy shoving her camcorder into my arms. "Here, you're my cameraman for this video. All you need to do is keep the camera on me and record until we get into the building." "Got it." I slowly nodded at her question before putting the camera back on her. "Record, now." She pointed both fingers toward me. I pressed the small switch on the camcorder and pointed it toward Tammy's direction. I quickly shot her a quick thumbs up. She got a little closer and stared into the camcorder. "All right, YouTube, it's your girl Tam for Horror, and today we're here at Williams D. Mental Hospital, and we're going to play a game of hide and seek." I slowly turned the camcorder toward the decrepit building. The building looked like it went through hell and back. The once scarlet red hospital once was a place for redemption for the unstable, turned hellhole. The building was old and run down. The ragged building stood up on a small hill with old rotting cracked stone steps leading to the hospital. The hospital had eerie feeling to it, like it generated bad aura. I'm not a spiritual person, not in the slightest, but don't you get a gut feeling not to do something, but your mind says yes? I wanted to follow my gut feeling and drop the camcorder and bike it all the way to my house. But I couldn't. We slowly made our way toward the hospital's entrance. The stench from the building was gut-wrenching. The door frames were covered top to bottom in moss and unknown black spots. As we entered the building, the atmosphere changed drastically. The air felt heavier and more thick. It was harder to breathe for me. And with every step we took deeper into the hospital, the damp ground made squish and splash, sounds like we were stepping in rain puddles. "Doesn't this look sick, guys?" she yelled out into the spiral steps going up. I turned the camera on the old, ragged steps and used my free hand to shine my flashlight on the rust-covered stairs. Whoa, this is trippy for it to be an old building. It's still standing when it's rotting from the inside out. I said, facing toward Hayden and Zara. "Alrighty, guys, it's time to play hide and seek. Who's going to go first?" She asked around, looking at everyone in the small circle. Zara slowly raised her hand to volunteer. "I'll go," she muttered softly. Tammy jumped up with excitement and snatched the camera out of my hands and shoved it into Zara's chest. "Count to 50. And if you find us, we have to help you look for the others," Tammy explained to Zara before running down the hall into slight darkness. Zara started her count, and I started running down the opposite hallway from Tammy. Hayden followed Tammy in pursuit. As Zara got to 20, I was a good distance from her. I shined my flashlight against the wall. All the dirt and muck covered the white walls with dirty, dingy flowers. I looked around the hallway and saw 2 doors on each side of the hallway. I opened the door on the right and closed the door behind me. Looking around the room, a patient's bed in the far left corner and a cabinet on the far right side of the room. A small stench of mud and must fill the air, and the rug in the room damp with dirt water from recent flooding. As minutes in the somewhat decent-sized room, I heard a light sound of metal dragging against the wall down the hall from the room I was in. I slowly got to my knees to crawl over towards the door to cause less noise. Putting my right eye against the small keyhole, I looked around the best I could. The dragging of metal stopped mere inches away from me. I quickly turned my flashlight off and was consumed by complete darkness. A scraping noise came from the other side of the door, then slowly to the door handle. As the door handle twisted and turned, I quickly ran over toward the bed and slid under it. The door pushed open. 2 big pairs of gray-looking feet walked into the room. It sniffed the dim, dirty air before saying in a deep, demonic tone, "I smell you, little one. I just want a bite." I covered my mouth to stop my harsh breathing. The figure slowly turned around and stepped into the hallway, walking down towards where Zara counted. I wanted to leave and run far away from here and go to the comfort of my home. But I couldn't leave them here with that thing roaming around. Coming from under the bed, I slowly crept toward the door and pulled it open slightly, slowing walking down the hall, turning my head behind me to watch if the creature tried to sneak up on me. I bumped into something hard and stiff. Raising my head up, I saw Hayden turning around and gave me a confused look. "Dude, watch where you're going," he said, brushing his clothes off. I quickly shot up toward my feet and grabbed his arm and tried to pull him toward the stairs. He pushed me back and grabbed my jacket collar. "Man, what the actually is wrong with you?" he said, tightening his grip. "You need to leave this place. I just saw something." I stumbled and stuttered over my words. As I said those words, me and Hayden heard screaming down the hall and multiple footsteps. Tammy and Zara raced down the hallway toward us. Hayden loosened his grip on me and put me down and turned near Tammy and Zara. "What is wrong with you guys?" Hayden said, annoyed, and turning his back toward the hall Tammy and Zara came from. "There's something in here. Down there it's big and grayish," Tammy stuttered. Hayden grew more annoyed and walked down the hallway. Tammy claimed to see the creature. He looked down the hall and turned around to us and threw his hands up. "You all are just paranoid. They're no-thee dash." Hayden stopped his sentence before pulling the handgun out his waistband and fired 4 shots. A large sickle plunged into Hayden's chest and cut upwards. His blood splattered over the dirt and moss on the walls and dropped to his knees. A tall, crooked-shaped, long, twisted arms, the big smile the man had, or whatever you call it, was big, and its sharp teeth pierced its skin. A sickle in one hand and Hayden's decapitated head in the other. The figure twisted itself and opened his jaw 10 times as wide as any human could and devoured Hayden's head. The figure set its big, round, red eyes on us. It licked its weapon covered with Hayden's blood off and walked toward us. "1 bunny down, 3 to go," it said in that same demonic voice. We all ran toward the old rusty steps. In a rush, we all tumbled over each other and fell down the steps. Once we all hit the dirty, damp floor, I slowly got up and stood up while helping Tammy up. Zara clench her right ankle. "Tammy, help me with Zara. Hurry." I lashed at her, picking her up and throwing her left arm around my neck, Tammy doing the same with her right arm. We quickly made our way through the halls of the hospital in search of the way we came in. The scraping of metal caught our attention as the figure slowly made its way toward us. The smile growing larger on its face, it quickly picked at its pace. We started running with Zara on our shoulders. Tammy somehow tripped and brought Zara down with her. Zara screaming in pain. Tammy quickly got up and tried pulling her up, but I quickly pulled her back as the figure tried to slash at her. Zara tries crawling away before the figure placed its foot on her back and stabbed her to shreds with its sickle. It took a bite out of her cheek and mauled what was left of her face. "2 bunnies down, 2 to go," it said while stepping on Zara's body. Me and Tammy booked it down the hallway. As we ran, the creature screamed, and it screamed loud. Turning the right corner, the front door was in view. As me and Tammy ran toward the door, footsteps came running toward us. With taking a quick glance behind us, 2 extra of those creatures joined up with the original one and chased us slowly, gaining on us. As they gained on us, I slowly started to slow down as I tried to keep up with Tammy. I reached my hands out and grabbed her shoulders and threw her to the ground. She fell into the wall, and the footsteps stopped, and screaming came from behind me. I turned around for the last time and saw Tammy reaching her arm out for me as the bit and slashed her. I bursted through the door and slammed it behind me. I nearly tripped down the decrepit steps as I rushed toward my bike. I yanked my bike from the tree and started pedaling as fast as I possibly could. I looked over my shoulder and saw the original creature that killed Hayden and Zara. With its free hand, it held up 3 fingers and smiled so hard its face was deforming. I pedaled to my house without stopping for air. I got home and couldn't sleep at all that night or for the next week. I still couldn't process what happened that night. An investigation was launched, but they never found the bodies. It's been 5 years since that night. I even left my hometown, but it hasn't left my mind at all. The way Tammy looked at me while being mauled to death by whatever those things were. Sometimes I see her in my dreams, tormenting me, asking why I did it. I could never give her a straight answer. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.